I realized I was disappearing the day I left the television on for 12 hours just to hear another human voice in the house. That thought came to me on a cold Thursday evening as I stood alone on the deck of my little beach cottage in Newport, Oregon, watching the Pacific Ocean turn silver beneath the fading sunlight. The wind smelled like salt and rain, and somewhere down the shoreline, a seagull cried into the empty air. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and stared at the horizon for a long time, wondering how a life that once felt so full could become so painfully quiet. I was 65 years old. Not 95. Not bedridden. Not forgotten by the world entirely. And yet every morning I woke up feeling as though my life had already ended and no one had bothered to tell me. My children loved me, I knew that. My son called every Sunday afternoon from Seattle, usually while driving somewhere. My daughter texted photos of my grandchildren from Arizona with little heart emojis and smiling faces. Love you, Mom. Miss you. We should visit soon. They meant well. Everyone meant well. But after the calls ended and the messages stopped lighting up my phone, the silence returned like an unwelcome tide creeping back onto the shore. Some days the quiet inside that house felt heavier than furniture. I had lived in that cottage for almost 7 years after my husband passed away. Back then, moving to the coast had seemed romantic in a bittersweet sort of way. A fresh start. A peaceful chapter. I imagined mornings with coffee on the porch, long walks by the ocean, afternoons reading novels while waves rolled against the cliffs. And for a while, that dream worked. I painted the kitchen pale blue. I planted hydrangeas along the fence. I learned how to make clam chowder from a neighbor down the street. But somewhere along the way, peace turned into isolation so gradually I barely noticed it happening. My days became identical copies of each other. Wake up at 6:30. Brew coffee for 1. Listen to the weather report. Walk along the beach path beside the marina. Smile politely at strangers. Come home. Heat soup. Fold laundry that never seemed to end. Despite living alone. Keep the television humming in the background for company. Wait for nighttime. Repeat. I remember one afternoon standing in the grocery store staring at 2 peaches in my cart and suddenly realizing I no longer knew how to shop for more than one person. That realization hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't really about the peaches. It was about the shrinking of a life. The narrowing of it. The way loneliness slowly teaches you to take up less space in the world. That night I sat at my small kitchen table eating grilled cheese sandwiches while rain tapped softly against the windows. The house smelled faintly like lavender cleaner and old books. I looked around the room and noticed how carefully quiet everything was. No muddy shoes by the door. No laughter upstairs. No one asking what was for dinner. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I suddenly felt exhausted by my own company. The next morning I walked farther than usual along the beach trail near Nye Beach. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but I welcomed it. At least cold made me feel something. As I passed a small cafe overlooking the water, I noticed a group of older women gathered around an outdoor table wrapped in blankets, laughing so loudly people turned to look at them. One woman nearly spilled her coffee while another wiped tears from her eyes from laughing too hard. I slowed down without meaning to. Something inside my chest tightened painfully as I watched them. Not jealousy exactly. Something sadder than jealousy. Recognition. I had once sounded like that too. Years ago, before life became appointments and silence and waiting for weekends. One of the women caught me staring and smiled warmly. I smiled back out of politeness and kept walking, but the image stayed with me the entire day. That evening I stood barefoot in my bedroom unable to sleep, listening to waves crashing faintly in the distance beyond my open window. The digital clock beside my bed glowed 2:14 a.m. in soft green numbers. I stared at the ceiling and felt a question rising inside me so strongly I could no longer ignore it. Was this really how the rest of my life was supposed to feel? Quiet mornings. Empty rooms. Waiting for phone calls. Waiting for holidays. Waiting to grow older. Waiting for the end. The thought frightened me more than death itself. Because I realized I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of disappearing long before I was gone. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise with the strange feeling that something inside me had shifted during the night. The house still looked the same. The pale blue kitchen. The framed family photos lining the hallway. The knitted blanket folded neatly over the couch. Nothing had changed, and yet I could not stop thinking about those women outside the cafe laughing together like life had not finished with them yet. I stood at the kitchen counter waiting for my coffee to brew and listened to the familiar silence filling every corner of the cottage. Usually I accepted it without question, like weather you could not control. But that morning, the quiet irritated me. It pressed against my skin. I turned on the radio just to break it apart. A soft jazz song drifted through the speakers while gray morning light spilled across the hardwood floor. For the first time in years, I did not want another day that looked exactly like the one before it. After breakfast, I opened the small drawer beside the refrigerator where I kept old birthday cards, receipts, takeout menus, and scraps of paper I never threw away. Somewhere beneath old utility bills and expired coupons was a faded address book I had not touched in almost a decade. The cover was cracked at the edges, and several pages had coffee stains on them from years ago. I sat down at the table slowly flipping through names I had not spoken out loud in years. Some had little notes written beside them. Moved to Denver. New granddaughter. Likes lemon pie. It felt strange realizing entire friendships had once fit naturally into my daily life and then quietly disappeared without any dramatic ending. Life simply drifted people apart the same way the tide carries pieces of wood farther down the shore little by little until one day they are gone completely. My fingers stopped on one name. Gloria Mitchell. I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. Gloria and I used to work together at the elementary school library nearly 20 years earlier. She had been loud where I was quiet, fearless where I was cautious. She wore bright scarves in winter and always smelled faintly like cinnamon gum. We used to eat lunch together almost every day while whispering complaints about noisy children and broken copy machines. After retirement, we promised to stay close. Then her husband got sick. My husband passed away. Her daughter moved to Idaho. Time folded in on itself. The number beside her name might not even work anymore. But before I could overthink it, I picked up my phone and dialed. The line rang 3 times. Then 4. I almost hung up when suddenly I heard her voice. Hello? For a moment I could not speak. Her voice sounded older, softer, but unmistakably hers. Gloria? I said quietly. There was a pause. Then a sharp gasp. Evelyn Carter? Well, I will be damned. I laughed so suddenly it startled me. A real laugh. Not the polite little chuckle I gave cashiers or neighbors. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper. We talked for nearly 40 minutes standing in our separate kitchens as though no time had passed at all. She told me she had moved into a smaller house outside Lincoln City. She complained about her arthritis during rainy weather and bragged shamelessly about learning how to bake sourdough bread during the pandemic. I told her about the cottage and the ocean and how my tomato plants never survived the coastal wind. Neither of us mentioned loneliness directly, but I could hear it living quietly between our sentences. Before hanging up, Gloria said something that surprised me. You should come visit me sometime. I make terrible coffee now, but I still tell excellent stories. I promised I would think about it. But after we hung up, I stood in the middle of the kitchen holding the phone against my chest for a long time. The house no longer felt quite as heavy as it had the night before. Around noon, I drove into town for groceries. The sky was low and cloudy, and the streets smelled like rain-soaked cedar wood. At the checkout counter, the young cashier smiled politely and asked how my day was going. Normally I would have answered with the automatic fine, thank you. Instead I heard myself say, actually, I think it might be getting better. The words surprised both of us. That afternoon I cleaned the guest bedroom for no practical reason at all. I opened the windows to let fresh ocean air inside. I washed old bedsheets and hummed softly while folding towels. Somewhere deep inside me, something fragile had begun waking up after years of sleeping. It was not happiness exactly. Not yet. But it was movement. And after so many years of emotional stillness, movement felt almost miraculous. 3 days later, I found myself driving north along Highway 101 with both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary and an old Fleetwood Mac song playing softly through the car speakers. The Oregon coastline stretched beside me in long gray-blue waves crashing against dark cliffs, and for the first time in years, I was going somewhere that was not a doctor appointment, a grocery store, or a family holiday dinner. I was simply going to see a friend. That realization alone made me strangely emotional. Gloria lived in a small yellow house just outside Lincoln City with flower boxes under every window and wind chimes hanging from the porch roof. I recognized her immediately when she opened the front door, even though her silver hair was shorter now and her glasses were thicker than I remembered. Some people carry their spirit the same way through every stage of life, and Gloria Mitchell had always carried hers loudly. "Well, look at you," she said with a grin as she pulled me into a hug before I could even say hello. "Still standing. I am impressed." I laughed against her shoulder, surprised by how comforting simple physical warmth could feel after so much time alone. The inside of her house smelled like cinnamon, coffee, and fresh bread. Jazz music played softly from somewhere in the kitchen while rain tapped gently against the windows. It felt lived in. Not perfect. Not quiet. Lived in. There were books stacked unevenly beside the couch, a half-finished knitting project draped over a chair, and 2 orange cats sleeping together near the fireplace. I had forgotten how healing ordinary messiness could be. Gloria handed me a mug of coffee and immediately began talking as though we had only been apart for a week instead of nearly 10 years. We sat at her kitchen table for hours sharing stories that wandered through decades. Former coworkers. Terrible hairstyles from the 1980s. Children embarrassing us in public. Men we once thought were impossibly handsome. At one point Gloria laughed so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes with a napkin. I realized then how long it had been since I had laughed without forcing it. Real laughter feels different in the body. It loosens something. Around lunchtime, Gloria insisted we bake blueberry muffins even though she admitted halfway through the recipe that she had forgotten to buy enough sugar. "Perfect," she announced proudly. "Now they are healthy." We ate them warm anyway, standing at the counter while rain rolled down the windows in soft silver lines. Later in the afternoon, we walked slowly along the beach bundled in thick sweaters while the wind pushed against us. Gloria pointed toward a cluster of older women sitting under blankets outside a cafe overlooking the water. "That is my little survival group," she said casually. "Most of us are retired. Widowed. Divorced. Forgotten by our busy children. We meet every Thursday so none of us disappear completely." The way she said it made me stop walking. She had spoken lightly, almost jokingly, but I understood exactly what she meant. There is a particular kind of loneliness that arrives later in life. It is not dramatic. It does not scream. It settles quietly into empty chairs, silent kitchens, and untouched guest rooms. It teaches you how to go entire days without being truly seen by another person. Gloria glanced at me and smiled gently. "You know the strange thing," she said. "I thought it was only happening to me for years." We continued walking beside the ocean while gulls circled overhead and cold mist gathered in the air around us. She told me about Patricia Dawson, whose son rarely visited anymore because his career kept him traveling overseas. Naomi Reed, who lost her husband 6 years earlier and now talked to her dog more than most people. Eleanor Hayes, who retired from nursing and suddenly realized she had no idea who she was without taking care of others. Every story carried the same quiet ache beneath it. Lives once crowded with responsibility, purpose, and noise had slowly become small and painfully silent. That evening Gloria invited several of them over for dinner without warning me beforehand. "You need people," she said simply while chopping vegetables in the kitchen. And frankly, so do we. By 6 o'clock, the little yellow house was filled with voices, winter coats, casseroles, and laughter echoing through every room. Patricia arrived carrying homemade lasagna. Naomi brought lemon bars wrapped carefully in foil. Eleanor showed up with a tiny rescue dog tucked inside her oversized coat because she refused to leave him home alone. I stood near the kitchen doorway watching these women tease each other over burned garlic bread and forgotten recipes, and something inside me shifted again. They were not pretending life had been easy. None of them were. But they had found a way to keep living anyway. Fully living. Not waiting quietly in empty houses for occasional visits from children who loved them but no longer needed them every day. As the evening grew darker outside and warm light filled Gloria's crowded little home, I realized I had not thought about loneliness once in the last 8 hours. And somehow, that frightened me almost as much as it healed me. Because it made me understand how lonely I had truly been all along. I stayed at Gloria's house much later than I intended that night. Long after dinner plates had been stacked in the sink and the little rescue dog had fallen asleep curled against Eleanor's feet, none of us seemed eager to leave. The rain outside had turned steady and soft, tapping gently against the windows while the warmth inside the house wrapped around us like a blanket. At one point Patricia lit 3 vanilla candles on the coffee table because she said every conversation felt wiser by candlelight. Naomi laughed and called her dramatic, but she smiled while saying it. I sat quietly on the couch watching these women move comfortably around one another, interrupting stories, finishing each other's sentences, arguing over old songs from the 1970s. There was something deeply beautiful about the way they occupied space together. No one apologized for talking too much. No one worried about being inconvenient. They simply belonged there. I realized then how much of aging had taught me to become smaller. Smaller needs. Smaller expectations. Smaller presence. Somewhere over the years I had started behaving as though loneliness was the price of getting older. As though invisibility was natural after 65. But sitting in that crowded living room surrounded by mismatched blankets and half-empty wine glasses, I began wondering if perhaps we had all accepted something we were never supposed to accept in the first place. Around 10 o'clock, Gloria disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying an old photo album thick with loose pictures tucked between the pages. "Careful," she warned dramatically while handing it to me. "There is evidence of terrible fashion decisions in there." We gathered around the coffee table flipping through faded photographs from decades earlier. Beach trips. Birthday parties. School staff picnics. Young faces laughing beneath sunlight. There I was in one picture standing beside Gloria at a 4th of July barbecue wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a paper plate of watermelon slices. My hair was darker then. My smile looked effortless. "You looked happy," Naomi said softly beside me. I stared at the photograph longer than necessary. "I was busy," I answered quietly. "Sometimes I think busy and happy look similar when you're younger." The room fell silent for a moment after that. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Eleanor rubbed the ears of her sleeping dog slowly and nodded. "Retirement surprised me," she admitted. "I thought I would feel free. Instead I felt erased." Patricia let out a small bitter laugh. "My son bought me an air fryer last Christmas because apparently once you turn 70 everyone assumes your greatest passion is reheating leftovers." We all laughed at that, but beneath the humor was recognition. We had all spent years raising children, building homes, supporting husbands, managing schedules, caring for parents, volunteering at schools, attending church dinners, organizing birthdays and holidays and graduations. For decades people needed us constantly. Then one day they did not anymore. Not because they stopped loving us. Life simply moved forward without noticing how still ours had become. Gloria leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms thoughtfully. You know what the real problem is, she said. Nobody teaches people how to age together in this country. Everyone gets separated into little boxes. Families spread out. Friends disappear. Then suddenly you are sitting alone in a beautiful house wondering why you feel empty all the time. Her words settled heavily over the room because every one of us understood them immediately. I thought about my cottage by the ocean. The carefully folded blankets. The untouched guest room. The television humming softly for company. I had spent years convincing myself I was lucky because I had independence. But maybe independence without connection was just another form of isolation dressed up to sound respectable. Near midnight, I finally stood to leave. The storm outside had calmed into a light mist, and the porch smelled like wet cedar wood and sea air. Gloria hugged me tightly at the front door. You look different already, she said quietly. How? I asked. She smiled. Like someone who just remembered she is still alive. The drive home felt strangely emotional. The roads were mostly empty except for occasional headlights gliding through the darkness. I rolled down my window slightly and let cold ocean air fill the car while soft music played through the speakers. For years I had believed loneliness was something private, almost shameful. Something to hide politely behind phrases like, I enjoy my peace and quiet. But that evening changed something important inside me. Loneliness was not just my secret burden. It was everywhere. In quiet houses. In unanswered group chats. In widowed women eating dinner alone at 6 o'clock. In retired men wandering hardware stores just to talk to someone for 5 minutes. We were surrounded by people silently aching for connection while pretending to be fine. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light illuminated the little beach cottage waiting quietly in the darkness. Usually returning home felt heavy. That night it felt different. Not because the loneliness had disappeared completely, but because for the first time in years, I knew there were other people awake in the world who understood exactly how I felt. And somehow that knowledge alone made the house seem less empty. Over the next several weeks, my life began changing in small quiet ways that would have seemed insignificant to anyone else but felt enormous to me. Thursday dinners at Gloria's house became a regular thing. Sometimes there were 5 of us around the table. Sometimes 8. Once there were 11 because Patricia invited 2 widows she met at church who confessed they had not eaten dinner with other people in months. Nobody cared if the food matched or if the chairs were uneven. Someone always brought soup. Someone always forgot something. And somehow that made everything feel warmer. I started noticing changes in myself almost immediately. I slept better on the nights after we gathered together. I stopped leaving the television on all day for background noise. I even caught myself humming while watering the hydrangeas one morning, which startled me because I had not done that in years. It was as though some frozen part of me had finally started thawing. One rainy afternoon, Gloria called while I was reorganizing my kitchen cabinets for absolutely no reason other than boredom. Question, she announced without greeting. If a group of older women accidentally started building a second family together, at what point does it become official? I laughed softly and leaned against the counter. I suppose that depends. Are there snacks involved? There are always snacks involved. I could hear voices in the background and dishes clattering. She was probably cooking while talking on the phone like she always did. I am serious, Evelyn, she continued after a moment. Do you ever think about what happens 10 years from now? Her question settled heavily in my chest. Because I had thought about it. More often than I liked to admit. The truth was aging felt less frightening when viewed from a distance. Society talked about retirement like an endless vacation filled with golf courses and cruises and smiling gray-haired couples drinking wine beside lakes. Nobody talked honestly about the quieter realities. The doctor appointments you attended alone. The growing fear of falling in the shower with nobody nearby. The silence after holidays ended and families returned to their busy lives. The strange invisibility that arrived once your role as caretaker disappeared. All the time, I admitted quietly. Gloria lowered her voice. What if we stopped waiting for our children to rescue us from loneliness? I frowned slightly, unsure where she was going. What do you mean? There was a brief pause before she answered. What if we built something ourselves? That sentence stayed with me long after we hung up. Later that evening, while waves crashed softly beyond my bedroom window, I sat awake thinking about the women gathered around Gloria's table every Thursday night. Patricia with her sarcastic humor hiding deep sadness. Naomi pretending she preferred solitude while talking endlessly about how quiet her house felt after dark. Eleanor who still instinctively cared for everyone around her because she no longer knew how to exist without purpose. And Gloria, fearless enough to say out loud what the rest of us were only beginning to realize. We did not just need occasional company. We needed community. Real community. The kind people once built naturally before everyone scattered into isolated little lives. A few days later we met again, this time at a small diner overlooking the marina. Rain streaked the windows while fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor below. Halfway through lunch, Gloria placed her coffee cup down dramatically and announced, I have a possibly ridiculous idea. Patricia immediately grinned. Excellent. Those are usually the best kind. Gloria pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. It was covered in handwritten notes, arrows, and little sketches. What if we found a property together someday, she said. Not tomorrow. Maybe not even this year. But eventually. Somewhere near the coast. Small cottages or shared space. Gardens. A big kitchen. Somewhere we do not have to grow old alone. For a moment nobody spoke. Outside, gulls circled above the docks while rain tapped softly against the glass. I looked around the table expecting someone to laugh or dismiss the idea as unrealistic. Instead, I saw something else entirely on their faces. Hope. Naomi leaned forward first. You mean like one of those intentional communities? Gloria nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Except less yoga and more casserole recipes. Eleanor laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. But beneath the humor, the idea kept growing larger around the table. Suddenly everyone was talking at once. Shared gardens. Weekly dinners. Helping each other after surgeries. Watching each other's pets. Movie nights. Book clubs. Someone suggested dance classes. Patricia insisted there needed to be an emergency chocolate cabinet at all times. I sat quietly listening while excitement moved through the group like electricity. It had been years since I heard people our age talk about the future with genuine enthusiasm instead of fear or resignation. Usually conversations about aging centered around medications, declining health, or retirement accounts. But this felt different. Alive somehow. For the first time in years, the future no longer looked like a narrowing hallway leading toward isolation. It looked open. Warm. Full of possibility. As we left the diner that afternoon, cold ocean winds swept through the parking lot while gray clouds drifted low across the harbor. Gloria slipped her arm through mine and smiled toward the water. You know what I think, she said softly. I think we are all too old to keep pretending we are fine alone. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I agreed completely. After that afternoon at the Marina Diner, something changed in all of us. The idea Gloria introduced stopped feeling imaginary surprisingly fast. At first we treated it like a joke that accidentally became serious in the middle of laughter. But over the following weeks, our conversations kept circling back to it naturally. Every Thursday dinner turned into another brainstorming session. Patricia arrived one evening carrying printed articles about senior co-housing communities. Naomi started researching affordable coastal properties online. Eleanor brought a notebook filled with practical concerns because, as a retired nurse, she trusted enthusiasm only slightly more than she trusted strangers with homemade potato salad. As for me, I found myself thinking about the idea constantly during quiet moments at home. While folding laundry. While watering my hydrangeas. While standing barefoot at the kitchen sink watching fog drift across the ocean beyond my backyard. For years I had been planning only for survival. Bills. Maintenance. Doctor appointments. Occasional family visits. Suddenly I was planning for something entirely different. Joy. One windy Saturday morning, the six of us drove together to look at a small property just outside Newport that Naomi found online. It sat on 3 acres overlooking a stretch of wild grass and pine trees less than a mile from the ocean. The buildings were old and weathered. One cottage leaned slightly to the left like it had grown tired over the years. The main house smelled faintly like dust and cedar wood. But none of us cared about the peeling paint or cracked porch railings. We saw possibility immediately. Gloria walked through the backyard with her arms stretched wide and announced, "I can already picture the garden beds right here." Patricia pointed toward an empty patch of land and said she wanted chickens even though none of us believed she would actually clean a chicken coop. Naomi stood quietly near the fence staring toward the distant ocean while wind lifted strands of silver hair around her face. "It feels peaceful here," she whispered almost to herself. I wandered slowly through the old kitchen running my fingers along faded countertops while sunlight filtered softly through lace curtains. For reasons I could not fully explain, I suddenly pictured all of us there together years from now. Coffee brewing early in the morning. Music playing softly while someone cooked breakfast. Laughter echoing down the hallway. Shared dinners. Shared grief. Shared ordinary moments. The image hit me so unexpectedly that tears filled my eyes before I realized it was happening. Not sadness this time. Relief. Deep, overwhelming relief. Gloria noticed immediately because she noticed everything. She touched my arm gently and smiled without saying a word. That afternoon we sat outside on folding chairs facing the property while eating sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Cold ocean wind swept across the field, carrying the smell of salt and pine trees through the air. "You know what is funny?" Eleanor said thoughtfully while sipping iced tea from a paper cup. "Society spends decades teaching women how to care for everybody except themselves." Patricia nodded. Then one day everyone leaves and suddenly we are expected to be perfectly content sitting alone doing crossword puzzles until we die. We laughed, but not because it was untrue. The older I became, the more I realized how deeply loneliness had been normalized among aging people in America. Entire neighborhoods filled with older adults living alone behind closed doors pretending independence always felt empowering. Meanwhile, so many of us quietly longed for exactly what we had spent our whole lives creating for others. Community. Belonging. Familiar voices in the next room. A reason to cook too much food. During the following month, our little group became closer than I ever imagined possible at this stage of life. We started sharing responsibilities naturally. Naomi drove Gloria to medical appointments after her cataract surgery. Patricia helped me repaint my back deck while blasting old Motown songs loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Eleanor taught us simple stretching exercises because half of us complained about lower back pain constantly. One evening we even held an impromptu dance night in Gloria's living room after too much blueberry wine. None of us danced particularly well. Patricia nearly fell into the lamp during an enthusiastic spin attempt. Naomi forgot half the steps to an old line dance halfway through and started making them up instead. I laughed so hard my cheeks hurt afterward. Real physical laughter. The kind that leaves your body lighter for hours afterward. Slowly, my cottage stopped feeling like a waiting room for the rest of my life. I started waking up with plans again. Purpose again. Some mornings my phone buzzed before breakfast with messages from the group arguing over gardening ideas or dinner recipes. Once Gloria texted me 6 photos of ceramic paint colors at 7:30 in the morning because apparently choosing future kitchen tiles had become a group emergency. I stared at those messages smiling into my coffee cup and realized something astonishing. I was no longer counting days anymore. For years time had felt heavy and repetitive, each week blending quietly into the next. But now life felt textured again. Full of anticipation. Full of movement. One evening while walking along the beach alone, I stopped near the shoreline and watched waves crash against the rocks beneath a golden sunset. The ocean looked endless in every direction, wild and alive beneath the fading light. For the first time in many years, I did not feel small standing beside it. I felt connected to something again. Not just to my friends, but to myself. To the version of Evelyn Carter that existed before loneliness convinced her life had already ended. And standing there with cold wind against my face and sand beneath my shoes, I realized something simple but powerful. We were not building a place to grow old together. We were building a place to keep living. By early spring, the 6 of us had stopped referring to the property as that place outside Newport and started calling it ours without even noticing when the shift happened. The old cottages still needed repairs, the plumbing was unreliable, and the backyard looked more like an abandoned field than a garden, but every weekend we found ourselves drawn there anyway. We painted walls. Cleared weeds. Hauled old furniture onto the porch while laughing at how none of us could lift anything without discussing our knees first. Somewhere between the chipped paint cans and shared sandwiches, the place slowly began transforming into something alive. Gloria insisted we needed an official name because according to her, every respectable movement starts with branding. Patricia suggested ridiculous options like Wrinkled Paradise and the Menopause Marina until Naomi nearly choked laughing. Eventually, after far too much debate over coffee and blueberry muffins, we settled on Seabreeze Circle. Simple. Warm. Hopeful. Gloria painted the name carefully onto a wooden sign we placed beside the gravel driveway one windy Saturday afternoon. I remember standing there staring at those words while sunlight filtered through the pine trees overhead. Seabreeze Circle. It sounded less like a housing project and more like a promise. Word about us started spreading quietly through town after that. At first it was harmless curiosity. Neighbors slowed their cars while driving past the property. A cashier at the grocery store asked if we were opening a bed and breakfast. Someone at the farmer's market called us the beach ladies with obvious amusement. Most people meant well, but there were still moments that reminded me how uncomfortable society becomes when older women choose joy too loudly. One afternoon Patricia overheard 2 younger women at a coffee shop joking that we were creating some kind of retirement sorority. Another man laughed and called us lonely old hippies. Patricia told us the story later while planting lavender near the front walkway. "And what did you say?" Gloria asked immediately, hands on hips. Patricia shrugged casually. "I told him at least we are happy lonely old hippies." We laughed hard enough to scare Eleanor's rescue dog off the porch. But privately, those comments stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because they hurt exactly, but because they revealed something sad about the way aging was viewed in America. Older people were expected to fade quietly into the background. Stay comfortable. Stay practical. Stay invisible. Nobody seemed bothered by lonely older adults sitting alone in silent houses year after year. But the moment we started building something joyful and unconventional together, suddenly people found it strange. As though purpose had an expiration date after retirement. Still, the criticism faded quickly compared to the unexpected kindness that followed. 1. Evening. Naomi created a simple social media page to share photos of our gardening projects and weekly dinners for distant family members. None of us expected much from it. We mostly used it to post pictures of Patricia's terrible attempts at homemade bread and Gloria accidentally painting one wall entirely the wrong shade of blue. But within weeks, strangers from all over the country began responding. Older women wrote comments saying they cried while reading about us because they felt the same loneliness in their own lives. Widowers shared stories about empty houses after losing spouses. Adult children sent messages saying our little community reminded them to check on aging parents more often. One message in particular stayed with me. It came from a woman in Minnesota whose mother had barely left her house after retirement. "I showed her your page," the message said. "Yesterday she joined a local gardening club for the first time in 6 years. Thank you for reminding her that life is not over." I stared at those words for a long time, sitting alone at my kitchen table while evening sunlight glowed softly across the room. For years I believed loneliness was something deeply personal, almost embarrassing. Now I realized it was everywhere. Hidden behind polite smiles and carefully maintained homes all across the country. One Thursday evening, a local newspaper reporter visited Seabreeze Circle after hearing about us through a community Facebook group. She was younger than my daughter, with curly brown hair and rain boots covered in mud from walking through our half-finished garden paths. She interviewed each of us while Gloria baked cinnamon rolls dramatically in the background because she claimed all meaningful conversations required fresh pastries. The reporter asked what inspired us to create the community. Patricia answered first. "We got tired of pretending independence always feels good." Naomi said softly, "People talk about aging like it is only decline." We wanted to create something centered around companionship instead. When it was my turn, I hesitated before speaking because the truth felt strangely emotional to say out loud. "I think we all spent years waiting," I finally said. Waiting for phone calls. Waiting for visits. Waiting for holidays. Waiting to feel needed again. Eventually we realized maybe we did not need to wait anymore. The article came out the following Sunday with a photograph of all 6 of us standing in front of the Seabreeze Circle sign smiling into the wind like teenagers skipping school. My son called me that afternoon after seeing it online. "Mom," he said, laughing warmly. "You look happier than I have seen you in years." I looked around my little cottage while sunlight flickered across the ocean outside the windows. Fresh flowers sat on the counter from Gloria's garden. My phone buzzed every few minutes with messages from the group debating curtain colors for the main house. Somewhere between loneliness and laughter, my life had quietly begun again. And for the first time in decades, I no longer felt like I was disappearing. Summer arrived slowly along the Oregon coast, bringing longer evenings, golden sunsets, and the kind of cool salty air that made every open window feel refreshing. By then, Seabreeze Circle no longer felt like a dream we were testing carefully. It had become part of our daily lives. The gardens had finally started blooming after months of stubborn rain and hard work. Lavender lined the pathways beside the cottages. Tomato vines climbed wooden trellises Patricia built herself while loudly insisting she was now an agricultural professional. Gloria painted flower pots bright yellow because she claimed older women deserved cheerful colors around them at all times. Every corner of the property carried signs of shared life now. Shared effort. Shared care. One Friday evening, Gloria announced we were having what she dramatically called our official summer celebration, which mostly meant everyone was required to bring food and stay outside until at least one person cried from laughter. By sunset, string lights hung across the back patio while music drifted softly through portable speakers balanced on the porch railing. Naomi prepared grilled salmon with lemon and herbs. Eleanor brought homemade peach cobbler still warm from the oven. Patricia showed up wearing a ridiculous straw hat large enough to block sunlight for half the county. I arrived carrying fresh flowers from the farmer's market and suddenly realized something surprising while walking toward the group gathered beneath the lights. For the first time in years, people were genuinely waiting for me to arrive somewhere. "Evelyn is here," Gloria announced loudly the moment she saw me. "Now the party can officially begin." It was such a small sentence. Ordinary, really. But standing there with ocean wind lifting my hair and laughter echoing around the yard, I felt emotion rise unexpectedly in my chest. Because loneliness is not only the absence of people. It is the absence of being expected. Needed. Welcomed. The evening unfolded slowly beneath a sky streaked with pink and gold. Someone started dancing barefoot on the patio after too much blueberry wine. Gloria dragged Naomi into an old Motown song while Patricia clapped completely off rhythm beside them. Eleanor sat near the garden laughing so hard at one point she nearly spilled cobbler onto her sweater. I watched all of it quietly for a moment from my chair beneath the string lights. The soft music. The smell of salt air and grilled vegetables. The warm glow from cottage windows behind us. 6 older women who had once sat alone in separate houses now creating something beautiful together almost by accident. A year earlier, I would have spent Friday nights alone with a blanket across my lap watching television until I fell asleep halfway through some cooking competition show. Back then I thought my life was shrinking naturally with age. I did not realize it was loneliness shrinking it instead. Later that evening, after dinner plates had been cleared away and the sky deepened into soft blue darkness, Gloria lit a small fire pit near the edge of the property overlooking the ocean. We gathered around it wrapped in blankets while waves crashed faintly beyond the cliffs below. Nobody talked for a while. The silence felt peaceful instead of empty. There is a difference between being alone and feeling safe in quiet company. I finally understood that now. Naomi broke the silence first. "Do you ever wish we had done this sooner?" she asked softly while staring into the fire. Eleanor shook her head gently. "Maybe we needed to become who we are now first." Patricia smiled faintly beside her. "Besides, 10 years ago half of us were too busy trying to keep everyone else alive and organized." We laughed quietly because it was true. Women spend so much of life carrying responsibilities that we rarely stop to ask what kind of life we want for ourselves once the caretaking slows down. I looked around the circle illuminated by firelight and realized none of us were trying to reclaim youth. That was never the point. We were reclaiming presence. Purpose. Joy. Somewhere during the conversation Gloria reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "You know," she said softly, "I think this whole thing started because you looked sad standing outside that cafe months ago." I blinked in surprise. "You noticed that?" Gloria gave me an amused look. "Evelyn Carter, I noticed because you looked exactly how I felt before all this." The honesty in her voice settled deeply inside me. For years I believed aging meant slowly becoming less visible to the world. Less important. Less alive. But sitting there beneath the stars with warm firelight flickering across familiar faces, I realized something profound. Life had not ended for us after 65. In many ways, it had finally become honest. No more pretending to enjoy isolation. No more shrinking ourselves to fit quieter expectations. We had built something rare together. Not just friendship, but belonging. And as the ocean wind moved softly through the dark pine trees surrounding Seabreeze Circle, tears filled my eyes unexpectedly. Not from sadness. Not from grief. But from the overwhelming realization that after years of merely existing, I had finally started living again. By the following winter, Seabreeze Circle no longer belonged only to the 6 of us. What began as a fragile idea shared over coffee and loneliness had slowly grown into something far larger than any of us imagined. The gardens were thriving even in the colder months thanks to Eleanor's stubborn determination and Gloria's obsession with buying far too many flower bulbs every season. The Cottages had been repaired and painted in soft coastal colors that glowed warmly against gray Oregon skies. Wind chimes hung from porches. Fresh herbs grew beside kitchen windows. Every house carried signs of life now. Real life. One afternoon, I stood near the garden fence watching snow dust the distant pine trees while Patricia argued dramatically with Naomi about the correct way to bake cornbread. Their voices drifted through the cold air while someone inside the main house played old jazz records loud enough for everyone to hear. I smiled quietly to myself because the sound no longer startled me. Noise had become normal again. Not chaotic noise. Human noise. The kind that reminds you that you belong somewhere. Over the months, more people started visiting Seabreeze Circle after reading newspaper articles or hearing about us online. Some came simply out of curiosity. Others arrived carrying the same quiet loneliness we once carried ourselves. A widowed schoolteacher from Washington spent an afternoon walking through the property with tears in her eyes because she said she had not eaten dinner with another person in almost 3 weeks. A retired couple from Northern California visited after realizing retirement inside a large empty house was making them both deeply unhappy. One woman admitted she sat in grocery store parking lots some days just to feel close to people for a little while longer before going home. None of those stories shocked us anymore because we understood them immediately. Loneliness had become one of the quietest epidemics in America, especially among older adults. People were surviving physically while starving emotionally. And somehow Seabreeze Circle had become a small answer to that ache. Not a perfect answer. Not a magical solution. Just a reminder that human beings still needed one another no matter how old they became. One Sunday evening near Christmas, all of us gathered inside the main house because heavy rain hammered against the windows outside. The fireplace crackled warmly while soup simmered on the stove and the smell of fresh rosemary bread filled every room. Naomi was teaching 2 newer members how to play card games while Patricia decorated sugar cookies badly on purpose because she claimed perfection ruined creativity. I stood near the kitchen sink drying dishes when my phone buzzed in my sweater pocket. It was a text message from my daughter in Arizona. "Mom, you seem happier lately. The kids keep asking when they can visit your beach community." I read the message twice before looking around the room slowly. Eleanor laughing near the fireplace. Gloria carrying mugs of hot cocoa through the hallway while loudly singing Christmas songs off-key. Wet boots lined beside the front door. Half-finished knitting projects scattered across couches. Steam rising from soup bowls. Warmth everywhere. I realized then that Seabreeze Circle was no longer simply a place where older people refused to age alone. It had become something much deeper. A chosen family. The kind built intentionally instead of automatically. Later that night after everyone left, I stepped outside alone onto the porch. Rain had finally stopped and the ocean beyond the cliffs shimmered softly beneath moonlight. Cold air filled my lungs while distant waves rolled endlessly against the shore. A year earlier I stood alone outside my cottage believing my life was quietly ending. I remember the emptiness of those nights so clearly now. The silence. The waiting. The terrible feeling that the most meaningful chapters of my life were already behind me. But standing there beneath the winter sky listening to familiar laughter still echoing faintly from inside the house, I understood how wrong I had been. Life does not end simply because children grow up or careers disappear or hair turns silver. Loneliness tries to convince people otherwise. It whispers that purpose belongs only to the young. That joy has an age limit. That older people should settle quietly into smaller lives. But we refused to believe that anymore. We built gardens. Shared meals. Celebrated birthdays. Held one another through surgeries, grief, fear, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. We created a place where nobody needed to apologize for wanting connection. A place where aging did not mean disappearing. I leaned against the porch railing watching moonlight stretch across the dark Pacific Ocean and felt something calm settle deeply inside me. Gratitude. Not only for my friends, but for the strange unexpected way life had unfolded. Because sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin after the world assumes your story is already finished. At 65 years old, I thought I was waiting quietly for the end of my life. I did not realize I was standing at the beginning of an entirely new one.